So welcome to the Identity Crisis Network, where we want to question and also maybe find some solutions on how we can think and what we can do with identity problems or troubles or questions which we have or identity related questions. We are now in the first stage of our project, which is expected to be big, and I hope you have some idea about what the project is focused on. That's why you're here. But I also wanted to announce that next year in May we will have a conference which will happen in Zagreb, and we wanted to connect with you by our form, and also in this way that we can a bit communicate here and listen your questions and I don't know, see what is your interest, because you will be very welcome to apply to present your papers or ideas during the conference. So if you have something to share, just keep it in mind and follow our social media. We will post update about it. Now a bit of other boring things. It's a technical issue. I wrote it in email, but also I just wanted you to ask to follow these rules, because at the bottom you can see the Q&A section, and it's very practically useful if you write your questions in Q&A session, so we know what are questions and can select it. Also, you can vote for questions if you see some questions which are relevant to what you want to ask. You don't need to double it. And also you can comment, or I don't know, ask to something more precise. And chat is for our common usage. If you have some technical problems, or I don't know, some questions to us or to other participants, please write in chat, but just please check if you have good settings and write to the person you are addressing your question. Okay, now, and at the end, Jan, I will read questions. So you don't need to check, but also if you want to read it, just for your, like, we will see how many questions we will have, but I'm ready to read questions and to also select it. So yeah, this is my task. Okay, now I already can introduce Jan Sowa, our first lecturer, and also I hope that this lecture is a kind of introduction to the whole project, because it asks like very, on the one hand, basic, but on the other hand, very complicated questions. And the lecture will be about new universalism and common denominators, as you can see at the presentation. Jan Sowa is a sociologist, culturologist, associate professor at the Art Academy in Warsaw at the Department of Artistic Research and Curatorial Studies. He wrote a lot of books and texts and is a great researcher. So I don't think that I need to go into details. You can check it at our webpage. But we are very happy to have him in our seminar and to have this chance to share with you his thoughts and ideas. Now I'm giving the mic to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, guys? Everything is okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very, very much for this introduction, and I would like to thank the entire collective for inviting me and for putting all this together. It's a organizational labor that's very annoying, but also very necessary. So thank you very much for doing this. And thanks all who joined us. For some reason, I can only see the organizational team. I cannot see the rest, and I don't see chat. So Vera, if you can like take the questions from the chat and then maybe sum them up at the end.
Yes, I will do it. You cannot see participants because they cannot turn on camera. They are in a bit different sections. That's how we manage it, because now there is already 63 participants, so it's a bit hard to connect. Yeah. But I will read questions, and so don't worry about this.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. So it's a kind of a distribution of the sensible, as Jacques Rancière would call it. Some people are visible, some are not. So those of you who are in the chat, I do not react, not because I ignore, but because I do not see this chat. So I apologize in advance. Okay, let me get to what I want to say, and I planned it for talking about I think 45 minutes, something like this, and then we have time to talk and discuss. Let me start with a picture that I think it's a great example of global circulation of cultural codes and of a very particular kind of universalism that happened in history. Happened long time ago, but I think it's very, very interesting, especially for me being Polish, but also for us in Central Eastern Europe, because of a historical context and historical legacy of this situation that it happened. What you see on the screen is Erzulie Dantor. Erzulie Dantor, it's a Haitian voodoo loa, so a kind of spirit, a goddess, something like this, who is protector of women, children, also patron of lesbians and women soldiers. Very interesting figure, a kind of important deity or loa. You cannot directly translate it. It's not a god or a goddess, but they say a loa, so it's a kind of a spirit, protective spirit. What is very, very interesting about it, for me, coming from Poland, is that the depiction of Erzulie Dantor that you see, which is not an artistic collage. This is an actual it's a picture that's actually associated with Erzulie Dantor worship, and what you get pictures of cigarettes or alcohol that you can see there. These are the offerings to Erzulie Dantor that are being brought in front of her images, right? So this is an actual. It's not an artistic work. It's an actual image of a certain cult that is actually being practiced in Haiti. So the depiction of Erzulie Dantor is based on the most famous Polish religious icon, the so-called Polish Black Madonna. You can see it here on the right. If it's not reversed, I mean, it's mine right. I hope it's also your right. Well, anyway, besides Erzulie Dantor, we cannot confuse them. It's very interesting that here the Virgin Mary, Mother of Christ, is black. Actually, the most holy representation of this important figure for Polish Catholicism is black. Probably it's an icon. It was imported somewhere from the east, further east. As you know, it's more the Orthodox Christianity that is associated with icons and the production and circulation of icons. However, well, we don't really know how it was brought to Poland, but it originates somewhere in late Middle Ages. That's the estimates. And it's now being held in Częstochowa in a monastery, and it's really revered with a kind of cult in Poland. This is a very, very important picture. So how come that this picture finds itself, this picture from Poland, from Central Eastern Europe, from Catholicism or Christianity in general, finds itself in Haiti, on the other side of the world, being put in this kind of a very bizarre hybrid articulation of no more than one religion, of a kind of a hybridization of various cults or various religions. Actually, this picture was brought to Haiti by Polish soldiers during 1804-1805 Haiti Independence War. How did the Poles end up there? It's also an interesting story. At the end of 18th century, Poland disappeared. It was partitioned between Russia, Prussia, and Habsburg Empire that later evolved in Hungary, right? So actually, at that time, part of Poland and part of Balkans, it was one country throughout the 19th century. So a lot of Poles escaped from Poland, also to France. And when Napoleon was waging his war against Russia in early 18th century, early 19th century, Poles joined Napoleon to fight Russia for Polish freedom. What Napoleon did was actually to send these Polish soldiers to Haiti to fight the slave rebellion that happened there as an aftermath of the French Revolution. So the Polish soldiers arrived there, it's early 19th century. They thought they would be fighting for Polish freedom. They end up in the Caribbean fighting not for Polish freedom, but for the French Empire, for French colonial empire, against the local slaves who revolt in the name of freedom. It was a very interesting and a very particular moment in the Polish history, because actually these soldiers, these Polish soldiers in Haiti, they identified with the cause of the rebelling slaves. They decided to abandon this French side and to join the rebellious slaves and to fight with them for freedom, that they understood it as a national freedom, but also for personal freedom, right? So they sort of, again, to quote Rancière, they identified with the cause of the other, right? Rancière believes that politics is not about fighting for your particular position, that politics is about identification with the cause of the other, not your own, but the other, the excluded other, who cannot be included without creating an egalitarian political community. And this is the essence of politics, not communitarian struggle for your own, but political struggle for the cause of the other. So this is precisely the moment when Polish soldiers identify with the cause of the other, for the reasons of national liberation. Obviously, you know, they went there and they thought to themselves, probably, right, we have very little evidence, but the reason behind it, obviously, also must have been a kind of identification with national liberation, right? So they knew what it was like not to have your own state, because your state is occupied by someone, colonized, actually. You can think about this period as a kind of a colonization, also Russian colonization. So nowadays, when we see Russians trying to rebuild their colonial empire in Central Eastern Europe with the invasion on Ukraine, this is something that has been going on for a long time, Russian colonialism, right? So Poles wanted to fight against Russian colonialism. They fight themselves to fighting for French colonialism, not against colonialism. That was one reason. Yet there was also another reason that I think is super interesting, and also maybe potentially can be fruitful politically, which is the identification between slavery and serfdom. As you surely know, in Central Eastern Europe, in general, in Europe, after antiquity, we didn't really have slavery the way it functioned in the colonial world. The Greeks had slaves, the Romans had slaves, but later on it disappears. And in Middle Ages, a different form of domination and subjugation emerges. This is serfdom. Serfdom, which is, it has got a double, two sides or two aspects. One is dependence that is linked with the land, which demands from the serf to work on the field of the master for a given period of time. That was changing throughout history. It was more or less depending on the period. And another thing is a kind of a personal subjugation, a kind of personal domination of the lord over the serf that had various incarnations or various aspects throughout history. And actually, in the east of Europe, it was much more oppressive than in the West. A kind of divergence historically that happened is that in late Middle Ages and early modern times, that is like early Renaissance, but also late Middle Ages, starting from 14th century, in the West, serfdom slowly disappears. And actually in 18th century, in most places in Western Europe, you don't have serfdom anymore, right? What you have is a growing capitalist economy and capitalist relations that are not based on serfdom, but obviously on waged labor, right? So it's a formally free labor. So you are free to sell your labor to whomever you want. You're not personally subjugated, controlled, dominated by any lord. In the east of Europe, east of River Elbe, that now separates East and West Germany more or less. So in Eastern Europe, nothing like this happens. Serfdom did not disappear. On the contrary, after a kind of easing in 16th century, 15th, 16th century, it starts growing more and more oppressive. So the serfs had to work more and more time for their lords. In 18th century, in some places in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, that at that time covered what is today Poland, the Baltic states, parts of Belarus and parts of Ukraine, and stretched at a certain point it stretched all the way to the Black Sea. So in the 18th century, right before this political behemoth is partitioned, colonized, in some places serfdom was 11 days in a week, right? 11 days in a week. How can you work 11 days in a week? That's only 7 days. Of course, you cannot. So it's not only for the male farmer, for the male peasant to work, but also his family has to work, his wife and his children, right? On the top of that, the lord had a strict personal control over their subjects. It was a kind of biopolitical regime. In the way Agamben understands, Georgia Agamben understands biopolitics, right? So it was a kind of power being exercised over bare life, over just the existence, material existence of the serfs, right? So the lord could decide who they should marry, what was happening with their kids, if they could travel or they had to stay in their village. You couldn't move out of the village without your lord approving. That was considered escaping, just like in slavery. They were forced by very brutal methods to work, corporal punishments, all sort of arbitrary punishments. That was widespread. The infamous jus prima noctis, which was a kind of an institutional rape on the side of the lords. A lot of reality that we know from slavery also was part of the life of the serfs, right? With one important difference, that people were not sold individually, right? There was a kind of human traffic, but it was wholesale, which means that one lord was selling their village, their dominion, with the serfs being subscribed, being attached to this village or to this land, right? So people were exchanged in commercial way, like trafficking, like a slave traffic and slave trade, but not individually, only in groups, which of course was a very important difference, because individual trade in slaves was much more harmful in terms of social consequences, destroying families, creating it was a very brutal enterprise. Everything in slavery was brutal, but the fact that, particularly those people who were even born there, right, with their families, and they had their families, they were just sold individually because the master just needed money or thought that the slave was not performing well or anything, right? So that was an important difference. I don't want to say that slavery and serfdom was the same. Obviously, it was not the same. It was a different formation. However, a kind of unfree condition of being dominated, having to labor for someone, being oppressed physically, that was very similar between serfdom and slavery. And also, if you look at a kind of a general social consequences of slavery and the kind of functioning of post-slavery societies. Poverty, but also reliance on community, on family, the importance of religion as a kind of support that those people needed. for their functioning. A lot of social, you know, you look here the picture on one side you have a Black Americans family in the South. It's late 19th century. On the other side you have a Polish family in early the 20th century. The kind of a poor agrarian post-slavery culture that evolved. It's very much the same kind of situation, right? So those Polish soldiers who found themselves in Haiti, who wanted to fight in the name of freedom and liberation, and found themselves fighting in the name of colonial domination, they completely switched sides, identifying with the cause of the other, recognizing in the black slaves their peers, the people who were in the same situation as themselves were back in their land, and they decided to fight for freedom, for, you may say, universal value of freedom, against particular interest of colonial empire that sent them there to suppress this rebellion. After the revolution ended, and it was a successful revolution, it was originally one of the most successful revolutions ever in the history of liberation and anti-slavery rebellions and fight. Here you see Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was the first president of Haiti. Of course, the figure associated most of all with Haitian revolution is Toussaint Louverture. But here we have Dessalines, and I put it here because after the revolution, he referred to the Poles, he called the Poles, knowing this history and knowing the reasons why Polish people identified with this cause of anti-slavery rebellion in the name of freedom, and learning something about the condition of life in Poland, they said that Poles are, this is the quote, the white Negroes of Europe. Right? So this is himself what he says. This is why I use the N-word in quotation marks, because this is a quote from the actual opinion delivered by Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So I think it would be too much of a censorship if we wipe this word out, especially because a black person is absolutely allowed to use this word. So in this sense, I think we are also allowed to quote it. This is a very interesting case of a kind of a double identification going both ways. You see, the Polish soldiers recognizing the case of the other, the cause of the other in this black slave rebellion, and the black slaves recognizing a kind of universal condition that they shared with some people from other part of the world, and like naming them after themselves, a kind of using their name to include also other people who are other racially. And actually the Haitian constitution after the revolution banished all white people from the island and forbid them from ever holding any land in Haiti. And exception was made for the Poles in this constitution because they contributed so much to the liberation of Haiti. So it really was a kind of a bilateral recognition going both ways between the Poles and the Haitians, right? And this is how Erculi Danto, this is how Black Madonna got to Haiti and got intertwined in a kind of hybridization with the local voodoo cult that was obviously brought from West Africa. In general, Haiti revolution is a super interesting case study. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. I'm just going to refer to the most important elements from the point of view of universalism, because this was the revolt of black slaves against French oppression, but what is very important, in the name of ideals of the French Revolution. When the slaves in Haiti, black slaves, learned about what was happening in France and the ideas of the Republic, they decided, they recognized themselves again in the cause of the revolution. They said, we are part of the Republic, we are also citizens, we want to be included in this project of Republic where citizenship is universal and is not linked with any particular position, class position or race or wealth or anything, right? That was the universalism of French Revolution, creating citizens, citoyens. there is a kind of a echo. Okay, thank you. So what also was important for them is precisely to underline this. Not only we want to liberate ourselves from slavery, but we are part of the republic. We are part of the new French Republic, new state. That was the original intent of the revolution, not to distance themselves and create their own state, but to be part of this universal project, this enlightenment project. And at the beginning, revolution recognized this and abandoned slavery. It was only Napoleon, who was a very reactionary figure, who actually reintroduced slavery and who decided to fight this rebellion and to make Haiti again Saint-Domingue. At that time it was not Haiti, it was Saint-Domingue, but I'm using today's name and the name that they later used. So to make this again part of the French colonial empire, right? There's a great book, some of you know it for sure, written by C.L.R. James, The Black Jacobins. Actually, I think this is the book that opens post-colonial theory historically. It's not Said, it's not Gayatri Spivak, it's not Homi Bhabha, it's not even Franz Fanon, it's C.L.R. James, the book written in the 1930s, that precisely explores this uncanny universalism of the Haitian revolution. He's describing really incredible scenes where Napoleon soldiers were surrounding, there was a siege of some city, or there was a fight going on, and in the evening the French soldiers were there in their camp, and they heard the black slaves singing Saïra and Marseillaise, the songs of the revolution. So they were like completely puzzled, and probably it also contributed to the victory of this revolt, that the French were completely, the French soldiers probably just quite likely some of them also deserted, I don't know, to the other side, like the Poles. But it was a kind of a very bizarre situation for them, going there and then hearing that people that they were fighting were singing their songs, the songs of the revolution that were sang against the monarchy, against the old regime, right? It really needs to be underlined that it was not a cultural transfer or a cultural inspiration. We should not think about it in these categories, in this way. It was a common discovery happening in parallel of basic dignity of human existence that was done by the slaves themselves in an autonomous way, and it coincided in time with the discovery of the same values and same goals: freedom, dignity, equality, by the French Revolution, right? So we should not think about it as a transfer or inspiration, right? Susan Buck-Morss, who wrote another great book about this time, Hegel, Haiti, and Universal History. She's very well showing this kind of universal dimension, just as the title communicates, right? She claims, her thesis is, and this is her interpretation of Hegel, who was very interested in Haitian revolution. In general, Hegel was interested in what was happening around the world in his time. He liked reading newspapers. He was the first truly modern philosopher, so it makes sense, right? Philosophy needs to reflect on what is actual, what is happening right now, not live in some heavens of substance and essence and all this bullshit that philosophy was exploring before. So Susan Buck-Morss thinking after Hegel is that Haiti revolution is the repetition of the French Revolution that makes it universal. That something needs to be repeated to become universal. So this is a kind of a gesture that actually Haitian revolution furnished and provided for the French Revolution. It was the Haiti, the events in Haiti that rendered the project of French Revolution and French Enlightenment also at the same time universal, right? Well, these were great times for universalism. It really was the idea of 18th and 19th century. I'm gonna go back to it because it was also very important for Marx and the proletarian international workers movement. However, this is not the kind of reality that we see right now. I am totally aware that universalism, universal, probably for some of you, maybe most of you, but for sure for a lot of people who are on the kind of progressive positions, it doesn't associate well, right? It sounds kind of suspicious, universalism, because of the legacy of colonialism and patriarchy, right? Universalism was used by the colonial empires to spread Western religions that were supposedly universal, right? So it was a tool of domination, right? So today universalism is regarded as a kind of a missionary element of Christianity that was implicated in colonialism, right? Not only religious in general. The colonial problem, the colonial legacy that kind of works against universalism nowadays is that in many places around the world, the white men evoked universalism because they wanted to dominate. So universalism was very closely associated, has become associated with domination because of the place that it had in colonial project, right? So it was not the situation of Haiti slaves where they themselves found that the French Revolution is their revolution. It was rather a situation where people didn't want to accept something, and this cultural content, this beliefs or this way of life or cultural values or the law or anything was pushed on them as universal. You have to accept it because it's universally valuable, right? The same problem is Western and white racism, obviously, right? Because the claim of universal has also been a tool of racism, right? It was white man's universal against the subjugated communities and cultures. So all other cultures were particular, and white culture, Western culture, was supposed to be universal. And the white man, as the bearer of this universal, this gold standard of universalism and also rationality, science, knowledge, etc., etc. Again, universalism was discursively very implicated in this. People who who perpetrated these colonial and racist crimes, they on many occasions they were saying that they were acting in the name of universal and universal progress, right? There's another problem linked with universalism, which is patriarchy, because obviously this is also a patriarchal argument, right? So it's the male culture, maybe not male subjectivity is better to say than male culture. Culture is dominated by males in patriarchy, right? So in this sense, it's a male culture. But here I want to say that the kind of a male patterns of functioning and values and positions, etc., are pushed to the level of the universal, which, for example, in Polish and I think also in other Slavic languages, we have this discussion about feminative forms of various nouns or adjectives, right? The problem does not exist in English. So those of you who do not know such a language, in Polish, like in most cases, it's like actor and actress, right? So you can have a male and female version of a noun or of some other, especially nouns that describe positions, functions, and professions, right? So the way it has functioned all the way until today, and the way the boomers would like to function, would like it to function still, is that the male form stands for everything. It's universal. So you're not an actress if you're an acting woman. You're an actor, right? You're a miss actor or woman actor or something like this, right? So again, this is an attempt to push a particular to the position of universal, right? Which is not a good idea, and I will not only from the point of view of ethical judgment, but also if you are truly for a universal, you should never do it. You should never push any particular to the position of the universal. I will go back to this question later on because I also have a kind of a positive idea of what to do with universalism to get rid of this of this problematic legacy of colonialism, patriarchy, etc., etc. So we have this term phallogocentrism that is a kind of a key terms of post-structuralist theory, where also, this is you may say where a lot of problems with universalism are expressed in this term, right? So it's, you have the phallus element, so this is the male element, you have the rationality element, right? Enlightenment is considered colonial because of this colonial legacy. So if you refer to enlightenment, then this is regarded as a kind of a colonial gesture. Despite the fact that there were other enlightenments, right? Haskalah, for example, the Jewish enlightenment. There was a very important thing that David Graeber explored towards the end of his life, unfortunately, abruptly finished prematurely, which was the importance of Native American, the First Nations, for development of Enlightenment political culture in Europe, etc., etc. However, this term phallogocentrism is a kind of a late 20th century, second half of 20th century term that epitomizes all these problems with universalism within the post-structuralist theory. And finally, the last nail in the coffin of universalism, which was the end of the Soviet empire. Communism was very much universal. For this reason, also, communism was anti-colonial as far as Western colonialism went, because in terms of Russian colonialism, you may very well claim that it was not really a communist state, it was just another incarnation of the Russian empire, which I think would be a pertinent description. I don't want to go into more details because it's a kind of a separate issue. However, on the global scale, the Soviet empire, the Soviet bloc, was strongly supporting decolonization movements around the world in the name of universal freedom, because if you treat them seriously, communist ideas are universal. You cannot be, if you're really a communist, like not what communists became, especially after the Second World War with Stalinism, or also before the Second World War with Stalinism, because Stalin is like precedes the Second World War, but especially Stalinism and the legacy of Stalinism. So obviously this kind of communism had nothing to do with universalism, but originally communism was very universalist. So the collapse of the Soviet bloc in 1990s, that was like the nail in the coffin of universalism. And basically nowadays universalism is gone. We are in the age of identity politics. So universalism is an idea that is incompatible with identity politics of our time. And the identity politics, if we understand by identity politics, affirmation or even fetishization of the particular. The identity politics is a kind of what in German is called Kampfbegriffe, which means the concept of struggle. So identity politics functions sometimes as a self-description, right? For example, Hannah Black self-describes her position as identity politics, but in many instances, it's a kind of a polemical or negative term that we use to describe the position of others. So I would like to, it's not, because if you think that I criticize identity politics, it may look as if I criticize, I don't know, anti-racism or struggle against homophobia or struggle against patriarchy, right? Because these things are also happening in the under the umbrella of identity politics. This is absolutely not the case. I want to underline that I totally support and take part in emancipatory struggles as much as I can, women rights, minority rights, refugees, etc., etc. It's not about the content. It's about this label, the way I understand, or maybe what I do not like about identity politics. What I think is problematic about identity politics is precisely this affirmation of the particular. Not so much identification of the cause of the other, but affirmation of the particular, and also a kind of a search for more and more particulars that's happening within this umbrella of identity politics. This is a problem or a phenomenon that is, I think you can see that it functions beyond political divisions. In this sense, that you may say there is a left-wing and right-wing identity politics. They are not equally toxic. I would like to underline this. I think right-wing identity politics is much more toxic and much more dangerous than the left-wing identity politics. No doubts about this. However, I think that actually left-wing identity politics, the way I defined it, I think it does not serve progressive struggles. This is the only objective I have. Not that I do not recognize the cause that it fights for. I don't think it's an efficient way of fighting for this cause. I think it's actually, in many occasions, anti-pragmatic or counter-effective, because it alienates a lot of people and it does not allow us to construct precisely politics the way Rancière understood it, as identification with the cause of the other, right? Because the other is always bad because it's not us, right? So even if the other holds a position that are similar to us, he's not us, so we do not include him. And actually, Hannah Black was very consistent. She didn't want anyone who was white to sign the petition against, when she protested Whitney Biennial and this whole Emmett Till unfortunate story, Dana Schutz's painting, right? So, whatever you think, you're not black, you cannot protest with us. This is, I think, politically, I think it's counterproductive. So obviously, the right-wing identity politics, it's easier to define, easier to recognize. We can see it everywhere now, and it's more and more pronounced, right? So it's nationalism, populism, white supremacy. Precisely, I think we could call populism white identity politics. It's about, community, cultural values, cultural particular patterns of functioning, and particular culture of white people that, according to this policies, this political ideology needs to be protected because it's endangered. It needs to be cherished because it's going to disappear. It's going to be flooded by otherness. It's going to be destroyed, etc., etc. Right. So I think that the right learned how to do it from the left. That's a kind of appropriation. Of course, it's not the fault of those, especially post-structuralist thinkers who advertise. For example, I don't know, Will Kimlicka and Charles Taylor in Canada, who originally coined the term multiculturalism. And it meant every culture has got its own rules. So you cannot apply rules of one culture to another culture. That was supposed to protect minorities in Canada. That was the reason, and First Nations. However, in Poland in the 1990s, it was the right-wingers, like, for example, Zdzisław Krasnodębski, Polish sociologist, and later Ryszard Legutko, Polish philosopher. Both of them served as member of European Parliament from Law and Justice. So Krasnodębski, already in 1990s, he took this idea of communitarianism. He was a big proponent of Taylor and Kimlicka, translated their books, wrote about them, and he used this as a tool, intellectual tool, in his struggle against the West, against Europe, against European community. So, for example, his argument is minority rights, women rights, gay rights. This is the part of Western culture, right? This is Enlightenment. This is what happened in France, in Germany, in the UK, in other Western countries. But that was not our culture. Our culture was different. Our traditional Polish culture was against Enlightenment. And historically, this is true. If you look at Polish culture, Polish Sarmatism and Polish traditional aristocratic culture, it was very much against Enlightenment. They didn't like Enlightenment. They didn't like Enlightenment ideas. They even wanted to ban aristocratic kids from traveling to the West in mid 18th century, because they realized that when they travel to the West, they come back and they are different. They are culturally changed. So this kind of idea of, protecting your culture from foreign influence that destroy the culture, what is behind, for example, this right-wing hysteria around LGBT, nowadays, that was already there in Poland in 18th century, right? So Krasnodębski is right. Traditional Polish culture, the way it functioned until it was over, ended by partitions, it was against enlightenment. So Krasnodębski says, if you try to apply the rules of Western culture in Poland, this is cultural colonialism. He's precisely using these words, right? So he says, our struggle against Western liberalism is a decolonial struggle because we are being dominated in a colonial way by Western modernity, Western enlightenment, etc., etc. And enlightenment is horrible. And he learned this also, or he's using this post-structuralist theory to back up his claims. You may say against the wishes and against political convictions of those who coined these theories, right? For sure, Charles Taylor, Wilkie Mlika were not supportive for any kind of fascism or nationalism or xenophobia. However, this is how it is used, right? So there is again, I don't want to go too much into details about this because this is more a kind of an academic discussion about post-structuralism and what was wrongly devised or wrongly constructed, not in a very good manner in post-structuralism that this kind of capture could have happened. But anyway, it happened, right? This is the right-wing identity politics nowadays that is using in this very perverse way post-colonial theory and post-structural theory, etc., etc. Then we have, as I already talked about it, then we have the left-wing identity politics, which is an unending search for differentiation. What sets me as apart from the rest, right? What is my particular identity? And you can see very well that the history of identity politics is common struggle being fragmented more and more to more individual and particular struggles that are more and more difficult to put together and articulate together, right? So this is the reason why I think that it's actually detrimental. I think it's problematic for progressive politics. If you support, I do support totally progressive emancipatory causes, and I think that it's identity politics makes it more problematic than actually efficient to fight for these causes, right? One of incarnations of the left-wing identity politics is an obsession with cultural appropriation, which I find unfortunate because if you think about it, in a very perverse way, it makes culture into property, which I think it's a final triumph of the liberal ideas, liberal philosophy. This is ultra liberal, right? If culture is also property, then everything may be property, right? This is a kind of a final propertization of the common, because culture historically has been the space of the common, and culture can only function because it's common. It's not it's not particular. It's not private. I understand the reasons behind struggle against what is called cultural appropriation, and I totally think that people who were exploited and people who were profited from should be compensated. And I think this is precisely what should happen. Symbolic actions are great and they are necessary. Affirmative politics is pertinent and it should be happening. It's really wonderful what was happening, for example, a couple of years ago in the UK when the statues of slave traders, like for example Colston in Britain, were overthrown and thrown into the water. All these symbolic gestures, they are important, they should be happening. However, there should be, first of all, material compensation for the victims of exploitation, colonialism, slavery, etc., etc. This is when and how justice should be done, by this kind of compensations. I think forbidding someone from using what comes from your culture because it's your property, I don't think it really makes sense. Obviously, if we were talking about reenactment of like a blackface being produced as a kind of reenactment of slavery relations or Jim Crow, etc., this is horrible, but not because it's cultural appropriation, but because this is celebrating oppression. So whether it happens with blackface or not, it doesn't matter. It's not the cultural appropriation that is the problem. It's the oppression that is the problem, right? But actually, this idea of cultural appropriation and treating culture as a property, it can really show us what is the root cause of the problem here, right? So I will refer very briefly to a social theory of Pierre Bourdieu and his concept of forms of capital. Bourdieu realized that it's not only material capital that is operative in society, which means material resources, but there are also symbolic forms of capital, not material, immaterial capital. There is something like what he called social capital, which means the network that you are in. And all of us who have anything to do with the art world here, I think most of us, if not all of us, we know it very well, right? You need to be doing things of quality. If you're doing shit and you try to push shit, it's not going to work. However, doing things of quality in itself is not enough. You need to know people. People need to know you. You need to be in a network. You need to function in a network to be able to advance your creativity, to be able to do what you want to do, to be compensated for this, to be invited to take part in the shows, etc., etc. So this is what Bourdieu calls social capital. And there is also cultural capital, and cultural capital is our knowledge of the world, but also our education, our manners, our way of speaking, our way of behaving. Cultural capital is embodied. It's part of our body, how our body functions, but also it's knowledge that we have. So what I think actually happened, and the reason behind identity politics being so much attractive for the left, because for the right, obviously why it's attractive, because identity is important for them, because it's about their cultural superiority, etc., etc. But historically, identity was not so important for the left. The class was. I'm going to talk about it, but not identity. So the reason why identity is so important is because in today's world of neoliberalism, where we are deprived of various forms of capital, especially material capital, we are just poor, briefly speaking. Identity is an asset. Identity is a capital. And it allows you to produce in terms of function better in your life, right? So we cling to identity because we are deprived of other things, right? It's a kind of compensation strategy to look for something that we can use as a resource, as an asset, right? Because we don't have other assets. So in a way, it's a correlate of poverty. Poverty in general, not only material poverty, but you may say precarity, being in a precarious situation, right? If you want a more elaborate, conceptually elaborate term, not poverty, right? So this is why I believe that identity politics, both in right and left-wing form, is a kind of an obscure, somber reverse of neoliberalism, right? Neoliberalism puts us in this hell of competition, precarity, being deprived of everything, also destroying the commons and traditional communities. So we are looking for something that is not alienable, that we own, we possess, something that nobody's going to deprive us from this, and this is our identity. So identity precisely functions as property or as an asset because we have so few assets or properties, right? So obviously the proper solution would be to do something with this alienation and this theft of our property that's happening, exploitation that is happening within capitalism, right? And identity politics is just a kind of compensationary formation vis-a-vis neoliberal capitalism. Okay, so after this long criticism and a kind of giving historical context, let me tell you how do I think universalism can be constructed to be part of progressive struggle and not to take us anyway regressively towards this colonial understanding of universalism. And here I refer to the concept of universalism that was put forward by Todd McGowan, a great American philosopher, psychoanalyst. in the book precisely that you can see here about universalism and identity politics. So first of all, McGowan believes that the true universal is not built around what we have, but around what we lack. So the question is not, or the goal or the procedure is not finding something that I have that is very valuable and then make other people accept it, and to construct a common denominator based on my particular value that is pushed to the level of the universal, but rather to look for what we lack in common. And this is precisely, if you go back, if you think about Haiti, this is precisely how this universal articulation of Poles and Haitians, of Polish soldiers and black slaves revolting, how this universality was constructed. It was precisely constructed around the common lack of freedom, lack of dignity, lack of statehood, right? They recognized bilaterally this lack in the other, and they identified with this lack, right? So obviously, this is against universalism, understood as any kind of export of virtue. If somebody tries to build universalism, walking around and saying, you know, I have, my culture is so great, I have this great cultural value, you should all accept it because my religion is so great, or my literature is so great, or my music is so great, or my culture in general is so great, so progressive, etc. This is not universalism, right? This is oppression of the particular. This is fetishization of the particular. Looking for the common lack, I think this is how we should try to build, to link struggle, right? So the universal is not is not a kind of a product to furnish and franchise, to export, but it's a goal and guiding value, right? Universalism only makes sense as a common struggle, not an application of something that is ready. This is another important feature, that universalism is a task. It's a stake. It's something that we are supposed to develop and not something that we have and we want to export. This is a colonial attitude. This is colonial particularism. This is not political universalism. So now, not to be, you know, so just empty-worded and just talk about theory, let me tell you what I think it's like historically a great example of universalism, and it's obviously the Workers' International and proletariat as a universal class, right? When you go back to Marx and how Marx understands proletariat and why proletariat is a universal and revolutionary class, this is very interesting because we can right away see what is the difference between proletariat and any sort of identity. A class position in the sense of proletariat, because proletariat are those who need to sell their labor power to survive, right? So in this sense, we are, I think all of us here, proletarians. We are not capitalists, we are not aristocrats, we have not inherited wealth, we cannot invest and live from profits, we need to labor, right? In various ways, but we need to labor. So the class position of proletariat is very different from identity. Why? Because identity is about recognition. Struggle for identity is you don't want to be ashamed of who you are, and you want to be proud of what you are, right? So this is precisely recognition. And if you look at all affirmative action and all the goals of identity politics, the way it functions, it's precisely about cherishing who you are, being proud of who you are, of your culture, of your language, of your identity, and not being ashamed of it, not hiding it, not having to protect it because it's destroyed. It's about it's precisely about affirmation of your identity, affirmation of who you are. Now, the problem of poverty and of class position is very different, because poor people do not want to be proud of being poor. They want to stop being poor. So the relation between what you want, where you want to be, and where you are, who you are at the moment, is completely different. It's the opposite, right? You don't want to cherish what you are. You want to destroy what you are. You want to get rid of poverty. You don't want to be proud of being poor. You want to stop being poor, right? Of course, you don't want to be ashamed of being poor, but this is not enough, right? Making poor people not ashamed of being poor which obviously I don't think that poor people should be ashamed of being poor. However, it does not solve the problem, right? You cannot be, you cannot do affirmative action and tell the poor, don't worry, you're poor, but you're great. We all love you as poor, right? You're great. You're part of society. Every society needs their poor. And there you are. So you are the poor. So we cherish you. We admire you. The culture of the poor, great culture, right? This is a neoliberal approach. This is precisely what the neoliberals are saying. The poor are needed. Society needs the poor, because this is a kind of, you work better if you feel, if you're afraid of poverty. So creating anxiety of poverty is a kind of a stimulating strategy, right? So Marx believes that proletariat is the revolutionary class because it wants to transform the world, not in its own image, right? Because the revolution is not about making everyone proletarians. This is already the problem, precisely, we are proletarians. The communist revolution, the way Marx envisaged it, was supposed to get rid of wage labor. No more wage labor. So no more proletariat, right? Proletariat was not supposed to cherish its identity, but to get rid of its identity, right? To transform the world, not in its image, but against oneself, right? Of course, the Soviet experiment, it was the identitarian perversion of the communist project, right? Actually, labor was fetishized, right? There was a kind of obligation to work, right? Unemployment was regarded as a kind of lack of virtue. This is completely insane. It's absolutely it goes against any idea of originally of communism. And actually, you can find more differences, than similarities between what was realized as so-called communism and the actual project of communism, right? So the idea of, and this is why the workers' movement was international, because the idea of proletariat struggle was international. It was not national. On national level, you cannot do anything because capitalism is not national, it's international, right? So that's the historical example. So now the question is, what can we do today, right? What is universal today? Where to look for universalism and how to construct it? So I think we should take, dialectically, we should take as the starting point Mike Fisher's idea of capitalist realism, right? Which means the moment when capitalism is so much developed that it actually becomes undistinguishable from the social world as such, right? Society is capitalism, world is capitalism, and capitalism is the world. It's completely globalized. And this is the situation that we see right now. Capitalism has almost fully expanded, both globally, right? If you do not include, I don't know, Bhutan maybe. Because now North Korea, even, it is intertwined with capitalism, right? It's implicated in capitalism. Cuba also, it's not any alternative. Bhutan, maybe. Bhutan, I think, is the last place where capitalism has not penetrated. But also, if you think about expansion of capitalism within the tissue of social life, which is commodification, right? So, because capitalism historically expanded geographically to include more and more territory, and within the tissue of social relations, which is commodification, right? More and more area being commodified. And now with, for example, social media, friendship is commodified, like entertainment is commodified, with dating apps, romance is commodified, and everything is commodity. So capitalism has fully expanded. There is no outside, right? Even if there is an outside, it's powerless. This kind of very pretty anarcho-primitivist idea, John Zerzan, for example, the kind of, let's destroy the industrial revolution, let's go to the woods, let's live in the woods in this kind of a community of pre-Neolithic, right, Paleolithic, neo-Paleolithic communities. Even if it exists, it's absolutely powerless because you are outside, right? Being outside means you cannot influence anything. What we need is a kind of a dialectical engagement with capitalism and not trying to evade it and to create your, lovely outside in a commune somewhere where you think that you're not part of the system and you enjoy yourself so much. This is a kind of a narcissistic, completely impotent position, right? So we need to start with universal condition and the universal danger of capitalism. These are two things, and that's almost the end of what I have to say. that I think may allow us to construct some sort of a universal progressive struggle, right? So the universal condition. The universal condition is the condition of waged labor. As I said, the proletariat, redistribution, which is a social democrat idea, as distinguished from the communist idea. Redistribution is great. Obviously, we need more redistribution. However, redistribution is not enough because it will never make the main problem go away, which is the lack of control over our time and our energy. In other words, alienation, right? Something that, for example, was super important for situationists and in general the avant-garde. So this is maybe interesting and important in the context of the art world, right? You have exploitation, which is economic, but you have alienation. Alienation is existential. It's somebody's taking your time, somebody's taking your energy, somebody's using you for the purposes that you don't want to be used, right? You don't want to. You need to work, but you don't want to contribute to destruction of environment. However, most jobs that you can find are jobs in industries that are harmful for environment, right? So you're alienated from your own ideas, right? So no matter how much redistributions we have, it's not going to make alienation go away. David Graeber, whom I evoked earlier, he's got a great point. He shows that actually wage labor contract derives from Roman slave labor contract in the civil law. When we sign the labor contract, this is the same contract that in the ancient Rome was used for lending the slaves, right? So the only difference is that now we own ourselves as the slaves and we lend ourselves to other people as the slaves. So that contract precisely, the way it functioned in the Roman civil law is that the slave is going to work for you there and there for this period of time. It's entitled to have a break, to get some food, and you will pay for this labor to the owner of the slave this and this amount, right? So precisely, wage labor is a slave labor in a different form. The only thing that we can do is to choose to whom we are selling ourselves as slaves. So this is the freedom of the liberal capitalist world, that you may choose whom you want to serve as a slave, right? So unfree labor is always implicated in some doing harm, even if we do not intend it. It's the wage labor, unfree labor is always problematic, and capitalism is never going to deliver us from this peril of labor, because capitalism may not function without waged labor, right? So there is no, it's only in a post-capitalist situation where we can see that this problem, we can hope that this problem is going to be solved. So this is the universal condition, something, as you can see, it's not built on any particular. This is something that we all lack. What we lack resources and we lack autonomy. So we are exploited and we are alienated. Both of these figures, mind you, are built on lack and on stealing, right? Because exploitation is lack of full compensation, and the capital is stealing part of the wealth that's being produced by the worker, and alienation is taking away something from us that belongs to us, that is part of our subject, of our personal existence, of our human essence, even, you may say. This is how Marx saw it, right? So precisely as McGowan argues, and precisely the way it happened in Haiti, this is universalism built on a lack, on something that we all lack, being in the horizon of capitalism. And as I said, the second thing, the universal danger, I think this is ecology, and this is the destruction of the ecosystem, right? There is something that we may say universal exposure, right? There is no dodging of eco-apocalypse in the long term. End of the world as we know it is going to happen if we do not do anything, right? Capitalism is party on Titanic. You know, we're having fun, and there are new gadgets and LEDs and, you know, self-driving cars, etc. But we are on our destination towards the iceberg, and we're going to hit the iceberg, and we are all going to go down. That's you know, now with COP29 happening, maybe you've been following this in the press, completely, you know, ridiculous. It's a lobby meeting for oil industry. That's what it has become. 1.5 centigrades, 1.5 degrees that we're supposed to not reach until the end of 21st century. We have breached it this year, right? 1.5. We are on the way to 2, 3, maybe 3.5, maybe 4 degrees the temperature change, right? This is really, and we are all going to suffer. And it's not only about CO2, right? As you can see here on this slide, it's about soil contamination and soil erosion, right? It's about loss of biodiversity. It's about direct pollution. It's about deforestation, loss of clean drinking water, the oceans, overpopulation, etc., etc. This is something. This is precisely. It's a great illustration of what Lacan means by the real. It is something you cannot dodge, you cannot escape, you cannot evade. It's going to get to you, and you're going to suffer no matter what. Global north, global south, east, west, rich, poor, not in the same extent. And this is a huge, of course, part of the problem, that there is no climate justice, and that actually the poor are going to be are going to experience the climate problems in a very, very dramatic way. But this, I don't know, 2 billion people, some estimates say 2 billion people at the end of century are going to live. 2 million people now living in the areas that are not going to be inhabitable, where human being cannot function by the end of century. All those people are going to migrate, right? So fascists in Europe or in the US, you may build walls, you may build fences, put military, etc., etc. You are not going to stop 2 billion people migrating, right? It's absolutely unfeasible. So wherever you stand on migration, obviously, I'm absolutely against this barbarous policies of walls and what is happening. Also, unfortunately, in my country, in Poland, it's really a disgrace, and I don't have really words to express it. So I judge it like very badly in ethical terms. But even if you think that building the walls is good, it's not going to work pragmatically. It's a pragmatical argument. If you really want to solve the problem, you have to solve the reasons behind why those people are escaping. So this is ecology, but obviously also this is post-colonialism and this is capitalism, because those people have been exploited in a very ruthless way. Mike Davis, the Marxist historian, described it perfectly about India, the late Victorian Holocausts, how British Empire ruined India and how it created poverty and famine in India. This is true for Africa. If you look what Belgium did in Congo, right? The Belgian Congo, absolutely horrible, appalling history. This is true for virtually the entire world, right? Because the what is global north, the white civilization ruled over 80% of the planet. So we are responsible as the global north or west for this 80% of the planet, right? So we need to. I have some more about Anthropocene, Capitalocene, but I don't want to make it too long. The last thing that I want to say, how to achieve these goals. I think we need a different political system. This is the political system we live in. It's super problematic. I put a slide here about women's suffrage and the suffrage movement, the first original cause around which the feminist movement gathered and gathered momentum also. The solution needs to be political, but we need new kind of democracy, right? We need to look beyond parliamentary representation. Historically, it was an important political development, but it's not enough anymore. Political representation has been completely captured by the capital through lobbying, financing of politics, media, revolving doors, etc., etc. What you see now in the United States, right? This is Elon Musk is the first full-blown US oligarch, right? This is a kind of a hybridization and cooperation between the business and the government that we have not seen before. But in the US, it's a known fact. During the last 50 years, 80% of elections, all elections, state, federal elections, governors, president, House of Representatives, the Senate, everything, 80 to 90% of elections are won by people who have more money for campaign. This is as simple as that. Not every time, but 80 to 90%. So you can see that this system, it's an oligarchy. We live in an oligarchy. It's not democracy, right? So we need more representative political mechanisms, right? We need more unmediated influence. We need different mechanisms of representations. We need citizen panels. I don't know, liquid democracy. Me, myself, I'm in favor of what is called lottocracy. I think we should do like the Greeks. I don't think we should have elections. I think we should randomize. We should choose our government by lottery. I know it sounds as a kind of a crazy idea, but believe me, there are very good reasons behind this. We may talk about this later on if you want. We need politics beyond the confines of national borders, right? Because nation state is handy for some political action. However, now it's too small a box to fit a solution for contemporary problems. Our problems are global. We also need a kind of a global articulation, right? And also interstate competition is a tool of capitalist exploitation. It allows capitalists to circumvent environmental protections, labor regulations, etc., right? So we are at the crossroad, just as Rosa Luxemburg about 100 years ago very pertinently put it. It's either barbarism or socialism, right? So this is the kind of solution, the kind of dilemma that we're facing. I think it's either universalism and progressive politics, or it's a barbarism and a slow decline into this kind of identitarian struggles and oppression, right? So the choice is ours to make. We need to think of ways of how to put it in action, but also we need to know what we want to achieve, and that was like the main goal of my talk. Thank you very much. Thanks for staying so long. I hope it has not been too boring or I don't know, and I hope that it has been clear what I wanted to say. I'll be very happy to have a discussion with you, probably mediated by Vera, as I don't have any other access. So Vera, please, if you can help, would be great.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for this lecture. I think that there is a lot of thoughts which it provoked. One thing which I want to say to participants, because actually we discovered that there is a possibility for you to talk. So if you want to talk and to ask question directly, you can just raise a hand and I will try to let you talk. But we also have 12 questions, and people voted for questions. So I will start from the most supported, not in a way of flattery, but I will start from like in this conservative way, and then we can see, because it's a bit hard for me to follow all these windows, so I will focus now on Q&A and we'll try to see if somebody raises hands and to want to speak. Okay, so the first question, which has 8 votes. How do you envision the role of artists, cultural workers, and theorists in fostering a new sense of collective responsibility which leads towards universalism? Do you already have some practices in mind that can serve as example of what you are proposing?
Mm-hmm. At the beginning, because I didn't hear the role of art in.
How do you envision the role of artists, cultural workers, and theorists in fostering? Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. So it's really interesting when you look at the history of avant-garde art from all the way from mid-war period, is that avant-garde artists have been engaged in political struggle. They have been interested in political ideas and participating directly in politics, right? From Russian constructivists through situationists all the way to Joseph Beuys, right? Who was the co-founder of the Green Party, German Green Party, as his social sculpture, as his work, right? So I think that already in the very essence of avant-garde art, there is this urge to go beyond the confines of the white box and to engage directly with society, right? So I believe that contemporary art, the way it functions, it cannot be really truly itself if it stays in the confines of the white box as an object of contemplation. It needs to engage in the real life, to work with the matter of the real life in this precisely way that the situation is envisaged and Beuys in his social sculpture, right? So you work directly with the matter of the real world of social relations, and this is how you may function as an avant-garde artist, right? And otherwise, if you try to put art back in the confines of the aesthetic experience, purely aesthetic, in the old term of not in the rancier terms of aesthetics, because he has got political terms of political view on aesthetics, but in this old view of aesthetics being ugly or beautiful, etc., etc. Right? So contemporary art, avant-garde art cannot function like this. So already I think there's a place, there's a platform, right? Now, another thing that is super important is the question of imagination, because the way that capitalist realism rules over us is by forbidding us to imagine an alternative. If you think about, Margaret Thatcher, her main slogan was, "There is no alternative." What does it mean, there is no alternative? It means do not waste your time in thinking about alternatives, in imagining alternatives, because there is none. So you're just, wasting your time. And, I think that if we try to diagnose what is efficient as a strategy of political struggle, that we precisely need to be doing the things that the power doesn't want us to do. Because this is what they think should not be happening and what they think that is dangerous for their hegemony. And this kind of prohibition of using imagination, of thinking creatively about an alternative, this is precisely a signal for me that what we need to do is to use imagination, is to produce the alternatives, right? Because imagination is a super political faculty, because imagination allows us to present ourselves something that does not exist, right? We are not in this tyranny of actually existing, because this is the capitalist realism, right? Nothing else than what you see is possible. Only the existing is possible. The field of possibilities does not extend beyond what you can see within capitalism, right? So again, in this sense, art as an enterprise that always uses and needs imagination and working with alternative, because this is precisely creation, right? Creation is coming into existence of something that does not exist. So in this sense, it's alternative to what exists right now. This is new. It's something else, right? All these adjectives, descriptions that you can associate with creation is precisely, it's an alternative that is brought into the world, right? So this is the second thing. And then the third thing, referring also to what I professionally am associated with, because Vera said that I work at the Faculty of Artistic Research and Curatorial Studies. And I think artistic research is a great example of how tools and techniques and skills that are artistic may be used and applied politically, right? You think, for example, of I don't know, forensic architecture and the work that they have done with, for example, the use of the destruction of nature in the war that Israel waged on Gaza before October the 7th, right? That's something that I think has had a great value. There are various investigations in all sorts of political crimes and exposing various problems, right? Using artistic means. But even older projects, if you think about Martha Rosler and her work on gentrification and feminism, right? That she has been doing since 1970s and 1980s. Her project, If You Lived Here, about the gentrification of Greenpoint and other areas of Brooklyn, but mainly Greenpoint in New York. This, I think, are great examples of how art can contribute to political struggle and to political causes. You know, there are others, Hans Hacke. We could really name. There's a lot of it. Actually, I think there's more art that is political that is not political in the art world. If we take art market aside, because art market is different, right? So I believe that there is I'm personally in favor of a kind of a spectral strategy of struggle. I don't think we need to all concentrate on one thing. I think we need to be active in various domains and various areas, because this is how capitalism is exercising its power. It's a spectral power. Capitalism has got everything: experts, artists, journalists, politicians, academics, activists, etc., right? So we need to be in all of these areas, right? So it's not give up art and go on the street. It's not give up editing and create a squad. It's not give up reading books and go on the street. No, we need all of that, right? We need to be on the street. We need to be in academia. We need to be in art world. We need to be in politics. We need to be in media. We need to be everywhere. So whatever you're doing, there's a place for this activity in a kind of a broader struggle. Yeah, more or less like short. I don't want to. If you said we have 12 questions, then I don't want to devote too much time to just one of them at the expense of others. So
we have already more. But let's see how it goes. Maybe not all will be answered. Okay. So another one which has 4 votes and which is again from anonymous participant. What are your thoughts on feudalism? Sorry for my reading abilities. Okay, what are your thoughts on techno-feudalism, recognizing the same patterns of feudalism in current problems with data and controlling? Do you think that it is still capitalism or something more? Sorry if the question stayed straight too far from the topic, but I'm interested in the context of peasants.
Okay, last week we had the premiere of the launch of the Polish translation of Varoufaki's book. I took part in the discussion that was organized by the publisher. So actually it's a kind of a very fresh topic for me. I'm gonna be kind of brief. I appreciate Varoufakis mainly for The Foundation of Economics, which I believe is the best book about theory and history of economics, and for his Global Minotaur. I didn't like techno-feudalism. I think it's not a good diagnosis. I think absolutely there is something happening and there are new developments that we need to address. However, I think that the ideas of cognitive capitalism, platform capitalism, I think the metaphor of extraction that is, for example, used by Matteo Pasquinelli as a metaphor describing what is happening, right? So this new technologies as a kind of extractive industries, just like the old extraction of natural resources from the earth. So they are extracting data from us and using them. So all this is a true problem, and we need to address it. We need to think about it. However, I don't think that Varoufakis is right in calling this feudalism. I think actually he has got a certain vision of what is capitalism, where free market is very important. And as free market does not exist in this area, or is profit as associated with the free market and market competition is not so important, and rent is becoming more important, then he believes capitalism is not there anymore. But this is just a vision or a concept of capitalism that absolutely not the only one, right? We still have private ownership of means of production. Nothing has changed. These enterprises are private. In their form, they are just stock companies, just as corporations have been for a long time. A lot of examples, a lot of enterprises he's talking about absolutely do not function the way he believes. Actually, equating Amazon and Alibaba, as he does in his book, is completely besides the point. It's really shocking for me that somebody who is a academic economist writes with such a complete disrespect for empirical data. Amazon, Alibaba Actually, Alibaba is closer to the model that he describes, because Alibaba is only mediating between sellers and buyers in a virtual marketplace. Amazon is a company that is doing all. Amazon is not only mediating, Amazon is taking care of the product route from the buyer through the warehouse, from the seller through the warehouse to the buyer, right? In the US, Amazon is the second biggest employer after Walmart, employing 1 million people. So saying that Amazon's profit is generated from rent, Amazon's profit is generated from the labor of those people, right? Because in general, value is generated by labor. Labor is the only source of value. I'm totally Marxist in this point. Amazon has got what is called Amazon Web Services, which actually is the most profitable and the only constantly profitable aspect of Amazon's enterprise, etc., right? Apple is completely different. Apple produces hardware. Apple mainly profits from hardware. 60% of Apple's profit come from selling devices. Only 30% comes from selling software via App Store, right? Meta is yet another completely different business model. It's different enterprise that's actually earning money by selling advertisement, just like traditional media. And it's just that the advertisements are sold in a different way, etc., etc. I don't think it's very linked with our topic. It's just to give you the idea why I think that this techno-feudalism it's a missed concept. I think that actually using the term feudalism is also wrong, because feudalism was not only an economic system, it was a system of a political power that had nothing to do with economy as such, right? And actually the political power enabled serfdom. These serfs were serfs not because they were addicted by dopamine circles to work on the dopamine feedback to work on the field, just as we are today with the media, but because they were forced externally by brute force to work in this field, right? So it's a kind of what it is. I think there's something new, and we have a kind of a propensity to use the old terms to call the new thing. When the car first appeared, it was called horseless carriage, right? So a carriage without horses. Before a proper name that is like better for automobile than the horseless carriage. So I think techno-feudalism, I think it's a conceptual equivalent of horseless carriage, right? We see something new, it's something bizarre, something we have not seen before, this is true, but we only have old concepts that we use in a kind of not very fortunate ways to describe this new. So I don't think, and actually I think that the diagnosis from the global Minotaur is still pertinent. I think the problem of Varoufakis is that he made a too good product, too good merchandise. That is the global Minotaur, and now he wants to say something new. Well, actually, what he said before is still valid, is still worth reading. So if those of you who do not know these books, I encourage you much more to read Global Minotaur or The Foundations of Economics, the great book that he wrote, which is academic. It's like it's more an academic book. I don't think techno-feudalism is a good book, to be honest, and a good concept.
Sorry, I
Sure.
was distracted by my boyfriend who is very emotional about lecture and express it.
Okay,
Okay.
let him ask a question.
No, he don't want. Okay, so
Okay.
I will read another question, which has 4 votes, and it's by Katerina Volochnuk. And sorry, I will practice my reading because it's really long. Okay, so I start. Thank you for such a great mediation on serfdom. I'm quite interested in what you mentioned about the Polish soldiers and their solidarity with Haitian people, about that shared universal idea of freedom and national liberation. I see where you are coming from, but it also poses some questions, as Polish nobility was at the same time perpetrating serfdom and had a colonial gaze towards part of Ukraine, for example.
Mhm.
Here I'm thinking of all the Polish Romantic literary workers, such as much of the Polish Romantic tradition, especially some works of Mickiewicz. Is Mickiewicz Polish or not? It's a question. But okay, I continue. Which revitalize and degrade both Ukrainian land and its people. How do we go about this seeming hypocrisy? Polish soldiers claiming an anti-colonial solidarity while some other Polish soldiers were enforcing quasi-colonial laws.
Mhm. Yes, of course, very pertinent question. I totally agree with all that you've read and with the question. Mind you, I didn't want to say that what happened in Haiti is a kind of absolution for the entire Polish society or Polish culture or for everyone in Poland, right? I was only talking about those particular people who found themselves in Haiti, and for the reasons of having a certain experience in Poland, they identified with this cause of the other, right? So it's not everything that you say against Polish domination, colonial domination in Eastern Europe. I totally agree. Actually, I wrote 500 pages long book about this, where it's explored in a lot of details. The book is in Polish. Only parts of it were translated into English. So again, I don't want to encourage anyone, reading Polish because it may sound colonial. It's just to tell you that I totally appreciate your input and I share your concerns, and I think that it is I think that Poland's state was a colonial state. I think the so-called Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a colonial enterprise, and I think that Polish presence in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states was a colonial one. And you can actually see it on various levels, including the discourse that was built around colonialism in Polish 17th century political writers who talked precisely, they use the word colony. They say the East is our colonies. That's just as they the Western countries they have their colonies in the Indies or in the Caribbeans. Then our colonies are in the East, right? He calls Ukraine Lower Poland. That's Piotr Palczowski, a Polish, Piotr Palczowski, Polish political writer of the time. And you can find you can find more. So all that is totally true. And actually, and that was my intention when I was writing this book about a kind of a colonial look at Polish history. Then I thought that the way post-colonial theory should be applied in Poland is precisely to explore these issues, Poland as colonizer. However, post-colonial theory in Poland was captured mainly by the right, and they use it as I described it. So they use it to advance the cause of Polish colonial suffering. So Poland being colonized and not Poland colonizing, right? Because Poland is in this awkward situation where actually it colonized, but also it was colonized later on. You can look at 19th century as a kind of colonization, and also Polish place in the Soviet Empire. We're not a republic, so we're not colonized in the same way as Ukraine or the Baltic states. However, we were in the sphere of influence, right? I'm old enough to have been forced to learn Russian at school. I learned for 5 years. I все забыл, but still, I had to learn Russian. It was an obligation. So, like, just kind of exporting the language, etc. In this sense, Poland was also colonized. It's a kind of I think actually Poland and Central Eastern Europe in general is super interesting for post-colonial theory, and not really being applied or used. Also, contemporarily, you think about the status of Polish migrants and Eastern European migrants in the West, in the UK, for example, right? Małgorzata Safuta, Polish sociologist, devoted a lot of attention to this. She wrote this great text, 50 Shades of White, where she argues that actually Polish workers in the West are not really white. They are off-white. They are white as a skin color, obviously, and they derive a lot of benefits from it. But in terms of a social position, they are not really like Western whites, right? So there's like a white, and there are other shades of white. So again, we could go back to this legacy of serfdom and the kind of experience that we had in this part of the world. I think that really there's there's a lot to explore and to apply when postcolonial theory is concerned. So no polemics here. All that you said is correct, and I think it should be researched, and in political or ethical terms, I think it should be condemned. No doubts about it.
Thank you very much. And I have comment from Katerina that thank you. I agree that reclaiming Polish post-colonial theory by the left would be very interesting and needed. I agree as well. Okay, next question is from Veronika, or comment from Veronika Zalewska. Again, long. Thank you for the great lecture. You've mentioned the act of leaving the urban capitalist space into the woods as mostly, in fact, into the woods as mostly impotent and unproductive. I completely get where you are at, but can't it be an act of resistance, no less? I'm not talking about extractive neo-hippie communes, but often very simple degrowth projects that are aiming at other means of production and communing, that are often harmfully seen through this lens of going into the woods from the hates of urban people just because they go on a protest once a year. Isn't it sometimes our arrogance from the standpoint of urban intellectuals, cultural workers who extract/consume no less? We are not more of heroes than some people moving into the woods and support bumblebees. If you know what I'm saying. I just want to emphasize it's not so black and white in terms of how we engage, resist through, though I understand you probably used into the woods more as a metaphor for a state of mind of passive separation from society. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. I'm a great fan of degrowth. I think that actually, if there is any future for humanity, it is only in degrowth, because the way capitalism functions right now, it's absolutely not universalizable in terms of spreading this around the globe. If everybody, I actually saw these calculations. If everybody in the world lived like Americans, we would have to extract 10 times more resources than are extracted right now, right? So this is impossible. So any future for humanity needs to be a degrowth future. I totally agree. And I think that it is valuable to do experiments in how to put degrowth into action. However, I think that these experiments are only, and I see your point, Veronica, about doing this in a kind of a distance from the mainstream of society, right? However, I think that it's valuable as much as it is able to generate solutions that could be applied elsewhere, right? Because you cannot move, probably human population is going to plateau around 10 billion, right? So now you may be a kind of a hardcore eliminativist and say half of this needs to die. I mean, like the earth cannot sustain 10 billion people, right? So we need to get rid of intensive agriculture. We need to get rid of various kinds of technologies, producing various kinds of medicines, because it's impossible. So half or even 2/3 of world population are going to die. I don't subscribe to this point of view. I think we should look for solutions that would allow us to sustain human population in a degrowth way. So I think the question is not if you are doing this well in the woods, meant not in exchange with the mainstream, not in any sort of relation, not in any sort of engagement, but only in your own isolation. So this is what I meant by in the woods. And I think it covers both the kind of a neo-hippie, mountain communes that are very often completely devoid of any sort of political ideas, but also a kind of a immigration internal immigration and distancing yourself from the world. I don't want to take part of in it because it's all corrupt, it's all fucked up, it's all capitalistic. So I'm on an island, and let the rest do whatever they want. So I think what is needed is a relation. So if this experiment that is happening somewhere on the margins, on the fringes, if it's an experiment that in a way can provide solution that we could all use, and is somehow devised in such a way, and as a horizon, it's an envisioning this kind of situation where this solution would be used more broadly, then I think it's perfectly okay. If it's an attempt to build a wall between you and the world and isolate yourself, then I think it's futile. I don't think it's a solution, because we could not all of us isolate. I think what is politically fruitful is something that could be used widely in a kind of I don't want to say universal, maybe global or shared or common way. So that's yeah, and I absolutely didn't want it to sound, a kind of urban against rural, because obviously the countryside is now very much implicated into capitalism, capitalist agriculture, and it's not that countryside is different in this respect. This is also what I meant by capitalism being a universal, global, not universal, global and all-encompassing form and force in this Mike Fisher capitalist realist way, right? So it's a capitalist city and capitalist countryside. So I don't think that any is better in any way.
Okay, thank you. We are running a bit out of time, and we still have a lot of questions. So I propose that I read one which has 4 votes, the most for now, and I encourage you to vote, all the listeners, to vote for the last question. The one which will get more votes will be the very last one. So now we have a question from anonymous participant again. Would you say that this kind of universalism and identification is something that pushes the international turn towards the political alt-right that we observe now?
Again, sorry, I don't think I got it.
Yeah. Would you say that this kind of universalism and identification is something that pushes the international turn towards the political alt-right that we observe now?
Yes, but what kind? Because I talked about various kinds of possible forms of universalism, also bad universalism, which is pushing your particular as the universal, the colonial universalism. We should maybe put this always in inverted commas. And I also talked about the proper universalism that is built around a common lack and not exporting your great virtue around. So I don't know what this kind refers to. Maybe the person, the anonymous, without de-anonymizing itself, of course, themselves, if they could say.
Yeah, it's possible to comment this question. So if the person who asked it is still there, please, you can elaborate more on it. And another question which has 4 votes is, and the last one, if the anonymous participant will not comment on the previous one, is by Mikhalina Sablik. And
well, I can maybe, if you can.
Okay, yes,
I can ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the US elections. Because some commentators said that there were people voting for Trump who were like migrants from Latin America, and also it was claimed that they were kind of united by the economics and by the cost of everyday life. And I would like to know your opinion on that, because it's like very current issue, and yeah.
Okay, sure. No, nothing in society is caused by just one thing. Like monocausal explanations always fail in society, just because society is super complex and most social phenomena are overdetermined. It's a concept that originally was coined by Freud, then developed by Althusser, the concept of overdetermination. So overdetermination means that something has got more than one cause, and more than one cause which is enough, right? So it could happen just for this reason, or this reason. However, in reality, it's happening, all of those things contributed, and this is the reason why it's happening, right? So I am very close, in terms of what is happening in the US, what has happened, I am very close to Cas Mudde, who is a researcher on populism. He works at one, I think, Rutgers, or one of the, or maybe other university in the US. He wrote a great book, the Far Right Today, published in 2019. And he believes, and I think this is a very good observation, that what we are witnessing is a socio-cultural articulation of socio-economic concerns. So actually, the problem is not a cultural mismatch. It's not this kind of idea that people hate otherness because otherness makes us anxious. This kind of a pop anthropological explanation or pop psychological. I think it's the reverse. I think it's because we are anxious, then we fear otherness, because we want to look for some security. We want to look for something that gives us consolation. And this is, in the neoliberal world, if you think about what common collective identities, collective scaffolding for subjectification have survived the neoliberal assault: family, nation, and religion. Just these three. Social class, gone, destroyed. No more social classes. We are all individuals. There's no such thing as society. Labor unions, super important for collective organization, collective struggle, destroyed, right? Any sort of international movement, international identification, all that kind of, internationale, all this is destroyed, right? Neoliberalism completely got rid of it. It's only, if you think about collective, it's only family, nation, and religion, just these three. And these are precisely the three collective scaffoldings for identities that the right wing is referring to, because it's available, because there is this English saying that blood is thicker than water, right? That blood is something that you have, like, more important because it's close. In Polish we say shirt closer to body. That the shirt is something you have the closest to your body, something that is the most easily accessible, right? So this is this kind of right-wing mobilization that is happening, and Trump is very good in using this. Obviously Trump, and this is a great, this is a disaster, this is a catastrophe for those people that they are represented by the likes of Trump. Yeah, it's really horrible. But if you want, I have a quote. This is, if I didn't tell you from where it is, or maybe I'm not going to tell you from where this quote is, and I ask you who said that. Now here's the quote. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share its wealth. Politician prospers, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. That all changes, starting here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. Who said that and when? You think it's an anti-globalization or Bernie Sanders or something like this. This is part of inaugural speech of Donald Trump in 2021. This is the kind of discourse, precisely, you the excluded, you the exploited, you the wretched of the earth. If he used this expression, communist expression, the wretched of American earth, this would fit, right? So it's it contributed vastly to his victory, not as the only factor, but I think in like the shortest possible explanation, I think it's a kind of reverse of the neoliberal destruction of society and collective identities, different than religion, nation, and family. So this three things is these things that they cherish. Our family, it holds us together, it gives us strength. Our nation and our religion, and around these three things they organize because this is what they have.
Yeah, thank you. I know that I promised that it will be the last question, but we have one volunteer which is raising hand and wants to ask questions. So maybe if it's okay.
Sure. Let's take this question, of course.
So Tia Chichek. Tia, can you?
You need to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I'm kind of.
Or Vera as the chief here, the boss.
Or we can promote her to panelists, right? So she can ask.
Yes, but it was like the last, because one person raised hand, but I'm not sure if she can.
She said it was a mistake. Sorry.
Yeah, she said it was a mistake.
Okay, unfortunately.
But hi, Tia. Happy you're here.
Yeah, hi, Tia. Okay, so thank you very much. There is a lot of questions and there is a lot of comments where people thank you and express their
thanks
gratitude. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that we cannot keep it longer. So yeah, so thank you very much, and I hope that I don't know, we will have another possibility to share. So
yeah, hopefully, and good luck in all future endeavors. I hope I will be able to join for at least some of the sessions. Some of the dates unfortunately overlap with my duties, teaching obligations at the university, so I will not be able to take part in everything, but hopefully at least on some other occasion. So thanks a lot to Vera and the entire collective for putting this together, and those of you who stayed and listened to the lecture, thanks a lot.